He wants to live life without paying for it at someone else's expense. He's comfortable with lying. He's good at it.
He fooled me. He fooled me. Till the end.
Could see that the case was almost going to spiral out of control.
David Carroll is one of New Zealand's most prolific swindlers of all time, with a staggering 220 convictions on his record. His victims say he is utterly charming, and he has a knack for moving on before he can get caught. He also likes to tell fantastical lies, claiming to have worked for a Hollywood actress and a world-famous rock band. Prison seems to be no deterrent. He's been to jail at least 8 times and seems set in his swindling ways. Duane Hapimana, a semi-pro pool player from Auckland, got to know David Carroll in 2010.
I first met David Carroll in prison. I was serving a term of 3 years, 6 months for a burglary. And when I got released, we traded phone numbers so we could catch up after he got out, because he was due for release 5 or 6 months later.
Carroll told Duane he was in prison for stealing money from his employer, a top salon owner in the capital city, Auckland. He didn't mention that he'd also been a serial offender for most of the last 2 decades.
He's a very friendly person, very outgoing. He comes across as a person that wouldn't double-cross you, I suppose, or harm you in any way. Yeah, he's got the gift of the gab. And you can regrow that.
Well, I don't know about that.
After he was released, Duane worked hard to rebuild his life. With his mother's help, he got back on his feet and tried to make good his earlier mistakes. When his prison mate David got out and had nowhere to go, Duane was quick to offer him a bed.
He ended up on my doorstep saying that he needed a room, so I naturally said, yeah, come on in.
Carroll's particular method was to worm his way into a person's life, win their trust, and then take advantage in any way he could. Duane would be no different.
He even went so far to sell the story when he told me he was studying. He come home one day and he said he needed to do a 10,000 word essay. He showed me, and I read it, and it was impressive, solidifying the fact that his story was true, that he was studying.
Duane later found out this was false. Even with his friends, Carroll seemed compelled to tell lies.
But he used to say things to me that made me think, why are you telling me this? And that's when I started having just little thoughts of what sort of a person he really is. It wasn't adding up.
Catherine Powley, a reporter at the Herald on Sunday, has followed the serial conman over the years and did some digging into Carroll's background. She soon realized he liked to pretend he was someone he was not.
He seemed to be a really likeable guy, and he would tell people that he had been a chef to the stars.
He was openly gay and cultivated a glamorous camp persona, saying he had toured the world as a chef with supergroup Coldplay. He also claimed that the American actress Stephanie Powers had invited him to live and work at her homes in Beverly Hills and Kenya.
He did say to some people that he was working in a top Auckland restaurant. They were all sort of far-fetched stories, but because he was telling them in such a likeable way, I guess they all just sounded, like a great story.
He had a number of aliases. Many friends knew David Carroll as Sam Palmer. But he also used names with an upper-class ring, such as James Staniford Smith, Wade Summers, and Bradley Packer Hill. One afternoon, while Carroll was staying with him, Duane got a nasty surprise.
I was getting ready to head out, and I went to put my vest on, and I didn't feel the weight of my wallet, which I thought was strange. So I checked my pocket. My wallet wasn't there. So it threw me into a panic because I haven't got my wallet, so I haven't got my driver's license, haven't got my ATM cards, and I asked him if he'd seen my wallet. He looked at me in the eye and said no, and I believed it. He came across as genuine once again.
About a week after his wallet went missing, Duane got a further shock.
Then I come home one day and my car wasn't in the driveway. It wasn't until I actually got inside the house and I decided to go into my bedroom where my laptop was inside its case, and I went to pick it up and there was no weight in it. And that's when everything started going downhill.
Carroll took off with the car and a $1,500 laptop. His guest turned out to be not a good mate, but a ruthless thief with no compunctions.
When he had the car, I was gutted because of the betrayal of trust. As much as I wanted it back, I would have rather have been able to get my hands on him more so than get the car back. But at the end of the day, I realised that he wasn't worth going back to jail for.
Duane got the car back 8 months later after residents complained it had been abandoned outside their house.
The police rang me and said that they've found the car in Parnell, Auckland City, and they asked me if I wanted to go and get it. Yep, that's where it was. Well, this red car is here.
But the car's registration had lapsed, and it had 18 tickets. Carroll had left Duane with a bill of more than $3,500, on top of taking his laptop and wallet.
I looked after him 6 months. Didn't ask for anything in return. Did it from my heart. I could not believe it. I was betrayed. I was in a world of shock and hatred.
By stealing Duane's car, Carroll wrote off a friend who had tried to help, something he seemed to have done repeatedly since childhood. In the course of her reporting, Catherine Powley got to know Carroll's family.
I spoke to his auntie. He was adopted as a baby by her family. His adoptive parents couldn't have children of their own. It's quite common in Māori society for people to take a child. And so they brought him up as their own in a loving family. He was very much adored from what I've been told.
His adoptive family said he was seen as a blessing and loved by everyone, given everything he needed and wanted. But then something happened to make this sweet and charming little boy change overnight.
He was an only child up to the age of about 10. That was when his parents were able to conceive, and the auntie felt that that was a bit of a turning point for him. He started to go off the rails and started taking things from family and getting into trouble at school.
Simone Powell is a psychologist and adoption expert.
Why children steal, that's an important question. And sometimes children will do it just because they can challenge, it gives them a sense of challenging authority or getting away with something. In other situations, it can be an act of hostility, a way of taking something of value off someone else, a way of getting back.
The new baby also arrived when Carroll was at a formative age.
At 10, they are developing that sense of moral justice and what's right and what's wrong, and children can become quite polarised in the way that they view things, and they can get into quite sort of black and white or fixed perspectives about whether they feel loved or not loved.
His relationship with his adoptive family got worse. At the age of 15, Carroll moved out and cut all ties with them. A few years later, he went to live in Australia. But taking things as a young boy had given Carroll a taste for theft. In Melbourne, he went on a spree of stealing and conning. He was eventually caught in his early 20s and convicted on a massive 72 counts. He served 3 years in jail.
He did end up in prison in Australia, and when he came back, he reconnected with the family, but before long he was starting to rip them off as well. He was staying with his cousin, and she had children as well. And apparently he raided their piggy banks, help himself to their children's money, so it just sort of shows what kind of a man he was.
Having stolen from his own family when they had given him a second chance, they decided that they wanted nothing more to do with him. This was the start of Carroll's biggest crime spree. Leaving the bottom of New Zealand's North Island, he headed to where he would not be known or recognized. David Graham runs a beautiful guest house in Ruakaka. One day his niece turned up with a man she'd just met at the local cafe.
At that time, he came into the house, a very nice, presented young gentleman, very alert, very warm, welcoming, you know, everyone got a hug, and he was that kind of person.
Carroll spun the celebrity chef line with his new hosts and offered to cook for them.
He said he was a chef. I think there was about 4 people here at the time that ate his dinner. It wasn't exceptional. It wasn't really a standard of a chef.
Then something else put David on alert.
I was sending some money away to my granddaughter, and I was writing her a letter, and he was watching me write the letter, and I was talking about my grandchildren, of course. And so I threw the money in with a card and everything like that in the envelope and had it ready on the table to post the next day. And when I got back that first day, he said, "Oh, I posted your letter for you." Well, no one posts anybody else's letter.
The card had contained $400 in cash.
So I rang my daughter and I said, "Look, if the letter doesn't arrive in 2 days, get back in contact with me." Well, the letter never arrived. He took the cash and pocketed it. I wish I'd rung the police straight away.
But Carroll stayed for 5 nights, spinning more and more lies about his work and personal life. Then one morning, he didn't turn up for breakfast.
Well, from the cafe, when he didn't turn up, I came back home to the residence here and walked straight upstairs, straight into the lounge to find my checkbook first, because I thought the first thing a devious person would do would take checks from the back of the book. And that's exactly what happened. There were checks missing, computer was missing, camera was missing, and money was missing. But I didn't realize he'd taken all my card numbers.
He called the police, and Constable Mark Stewart responded.
Initially, I took notes from David, the victim, that it was actually a bed and breakfast that the offender had stayed at. So what I actually initially thought it was just a normal residential burglary. Subsequent inquiries revealed that it wasn't.
They discovered that Carroll had used David's Visa card for multiple transactions.
I think because of the nature of the offence, he woke up in the morning and thought, I'm going to suddenly burgle this house. I think he was always going to rip them off in some way.
You open your home to people and you've got a B&B, you don't think that they're going to come in and rob you blind. The cash would have been $2,500 on the credit card. He fooled me.
Because no details were gained from the owners, it then turned to forensic. I did expect a fingerprint match. I believed that the offender had committed those similar type offences previously, so I did expect a match.
1033R, can you put us 3am, Tiki, OT, and then back to town?
Afternoon, can you log me on for 8 hours, please?
3 weeks later, Constable Stewart got results from a fingerprint on an empty crisp packet found in Carroll's room. When he pulled up the identity, he was astonished to see what was on file.
He was actually, at that time, wanted from the bottom of the North Island to the top of the North Island, and I could build a picture around that as to how busy he was.
Constable Stewart was the first officer to realise the sheer number of Carroll's crimes and put it all together. He saw there was a pattern. Carroll was targeting B&B owners all over New Zealand who were part of the gay stay network. Carroll is gay, and he was using this to his advantage to find sympathetic strangers.
So the first time I saw him, he'd pulled in here to the driveway. He sort of pranced up, and I said, "Hi, do I know you?" And he gave me three kisses, and said, "No, you don't, but I want to look at your accommodation." Well, I thought he was just a very flamboyant gay man. He was very well dressed. He had on a beautiful jumper and very smart jeans. He had a way about him. He said he had lived in Australia, but he was a chef and had been living in Kenya. He'd worked on Stephanie Power's resort, taking tourists up and down on safaris and doing chefing for them. So I'm thinking, wow, gosh, what an amazing life this guy's had. So the next day he came over and said he'd like to rent the place for 6 months. And I sorted out a price and I got a contract out.
Bye. Bye, Ruby.
Then he asked me for the bank account number so that he could put money in it. And he sat beside me out here and tapped it in, and then he said, "Oh, that didn't go through." He said, "Can you give me the number again?" And I did, and he stood up and he said, "Oh, good, that went through."
Julia Woodhouse was charmed by her new tenant. But a few days later, she realised the money had not arrived in her account.
I just got a funny feeling that things weren't as he said they were. He was very clever, though, because when he's cunning and he's able to hone in on things that people are interested in, but he reveals very little of himself.
The next day, Carroll didn't come in for breakfast, and Julia was immediately suspicious.
So when he didn't turn up, I thought, I'm going to check out his little cabin. And I walked in here, and he had breakfast things on here, and the rubbish bin was full of invoices and receipts. He'd been out and had a big spend up. And then I saw a credit card made out in someone else's name, and I knew straight away he was a thief. I thought, this guy is a con man, and we've been duped. Yes?
She rang her bank before Carroll could try and use her details. Luckily, she only lost the money he owed for the accommodation.
It wasn't a large amount of money, about $360. But what was more infuriating and more upsetting for us was the fact that he was a gay man taking advantage of us being gay as well. There should have been an unspoken loyalty there.
Carroll got away with this crime spree by keeping each of the cons quite small and committing them all over New Zealand.
He was always one step ahead, it seemed, for a long time. He constantly travelled, he constantly moved. There were 16 victims between Wellington and Ruakaka. Over a space of a year, he was moving all the time. Once you were onto him, he was already in a city or a different town.
But Constable Stewart started to close in with the help of some vigilant banks. This image shows Carroll brazenly trying to cash one of the cheques he stole from David Graham, in Ruakaka.
What he did was incredible. One occasion he befriended a guy down in Auckland and they went out for lunch, and by that point he had already stolen his credit cards. I don't know how. And so when they went out for lunch they actually argued about who was going to pay the bill, but Carroll ended up paying with the victim's credit card.
There is a way to make an entrance.
This is my destiny.
It was now a conspiracy of witches.
Download Veely today.
Carroll hadn't counted on Julia Woodhouse taking a stand. The B&B owner was so upset, she decided to turn vigilante. She put out a warning on New Zealand's Gay Stay network and created a Facebook page to try and gather information from other victims. His next scam was even more outrageous. This time, he was back in Auckland.
The Domain Lodge is a special hotel that's owned by the Cancer Society of New Zealand, and it's really supposed to be for people who need to stay in Auckland near the hospital. So he told the people at the lodge that his grandfather had cancer, and that's why he needed to stay there.
He always had a hard luck story. He was always either visiting a sick relative, or one of his things he used to say was that he had just recently broken up with his partner. So I think people just warmed to him and actually felt sorry for him in a way.
The cancer charity was reportedly left $800 out of pocket. He went without settling his bill or returning the key. Constable Stewart learned that Carroll had been in prison until February that year. His file said the previous victim had been a member of his own family. In a moment of desperation, Carroll seems to have sought help from his adoptive grandmother. She was 85 years old and lived alone, so he offered to move in and look after her.
She was elderly and he was helping her with her finances and managing her bank accounts. He got her PIN numbers for her bank cards and got her hooked into online banking and siphoned money out of her account.
Even a vulnerable old woman, his own relative, was fair game.
He managed to steal his grandmother's bank card, and over a period of 2 to 3 months he used that card basically as a savings account, and he stole upwards of $20,000 from that account.
She lost her life savings. The family was devastated once again.
They want nothing to do with him. They're very bitter and upset. It's just quite bewildering to them. Yeah.
As the string of frauds grew to epic proportions, Carroll continued to enjoy the good life. One night in a bar in Herne Bay, Auckland, he joined a table of strangers and started talking about his work as a celebrity chef. To one person there, this story sounded strangely familiar.
One night last year, I came to find a few of my friends and a few of the regulars here drinking with someone I hadn't seen before. And as I asked who he was, I got a feeling like he was quite familiar. I realised that the face I was looking at was the face that my mother had sent through on an email saying that this individual, this man, had stolen money from their bed and breakfast, that he'd stolen money off a number of other people, and that he was wanted by the police.
I got a phone call from Henry, and he said, Mum, he said, you know that guy, that conman that stayed with you? And I said, yes. And he said, I think he's sitting at our table. And I said, I'll send a photo of him to your cell phone.
She sent the photo through, and I mean, his face was right there in front of me again on the screen.
Carroll had no idea someone at the table was onto him, and Henry knew he had to keep it that way.
So what I did is when he went to the toilet, I said, look, this is who I think this guy might be. In fact, probably is. I need you to play along. And so they went along with my ruse, and kept him entertained. And I went off and called the police, who eventually showed up just here. As soon as they walked in, he put his head down.
So he rang back and he said to me, the police have arrived. He didn't say a word, he didn't look at anybody, and he just walked off down the street with them. Good job.
Carroll went on trial in a courthouse that was now all too familiar. This time, he was charged with 76 theft and fraud offences.
He would be the most prolific offender that I've dealt with in 12 years, frontline policing in New Zealand.
The day I came in, I was absolutely gutted because I spent all day in there. And after 76 charges of burglary and 1 breach of parole, he was sentenced to 2 years and 8 months. So, how am I supposed to feel after all that? The judge didn't give his letter of remorse much credit and actually told him that. I truly believe after being in prison myself, one thing that I came out with the knowledge of was 75% of people that are in jail today shouldn't be there, and the other 25% should never get out. And I think he belongs in the 25%.
Carroll pleaded guilty to all charges. The total value of his most recent crimes was $132,000. But the damage to people's trust and sense of security was immeasurable.
I think he probably gets a huge thrill out of just thinking he's smarter than other people. You know, the audacity of him coming into our home is an abuse, really.
I do truly believe that he wants to live life without paying for it. He wants to live life at someone else's expense. He's comfortable with lying. I don't know how he sleeps at night.